we were sort of working with one of the consumer apps who were scaling pretty fast, right? And when you're scaling, in order to keep your CPAs under control, the number one thing that you have to do is constantly discover new audiences in pockets. This is actually quite interesting because we started working with one of a larger growth team that spends, double-digit millions on Meta, and their process was such that they would launch a campaign of maybe 50 creatives in a week or so, and then at the end of the week, the entire creative team would sort of come together for a sync up, and everybody would have watched all the creatives and everybody would have made their notes on.
You are listening to Full Funnel.
Hey, Full Funnel crew, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Rohit, your resident marketing nerd, exploring all the AI first strategies that actually can help you drive growth. Today, we are talking about a new kingmaker in paid media, creative intelligence. My guest is Atharva Padhye, co founder and chief business officer of GetCrux. After launching Kalshi for India consumer app, Atharva pivoted to solve the problem that every growth team feels, right? Which is essentially, why was yesterday's winning ads tanking today, right? And so GetCrux mines more than 100 on-screen signals, hook, timing, pacing, music, and even talent to predict which concepts would actually drop your CAC, and then spits out ready to launch CTV, Meta, TikTok spots in just minutes. Some of the most prominent brands out there are already seeing great scale and double-digit cost cuts. Atharva, awesome to have you here. A quick icebreaker before we dive in. Please introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your background and what got you to this point.
Amazing. And thanks, Rohit, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you. A little bit about me. I graduated from IT Bombay a couple of years back and started GetCrux right out of college. Like you mentioned, my first project was a consumer app, which was a betting app, which is Kalshi for India. And while building that app, the number one struggle that we had is how do you consistently acquire users with paid media.
That's
And
right.
over the last few years, we've seen that creative has become the number one lever to optimize and scale, and
Yeah.
that led us to focus entirely on solving this problem for marketing teams.
Amazing. Amazing. That's a great problem to solve. I think we are talking about how creative drives most of the marketing strategy, and measurement kind of helps you fine tune, your budget allocations and audience strategy and stuff like that, right? So, with regards to GetCrux, essentially, we've seen this trend of marketers essentially copying what you call yesterday's top ads and essentially fall into this lazy marketer's trap, right? What was that single moment, like a single campaign or creative flop that essentially convinced you that this needed to kind of be solved or changed?
Yeah, for sure. I think when we were sort of working with one of the consumer apps who were scaling pretty fast, right? And when you're scaling, in order to keep your CPAs under control, the number one thing that you have to do is constantly discover new audiences in pockets, and make very specific creatives that speak to those audiences so that the algorithm can take that creative to those audiences, which will result in lower CPAs, right? The struggle was that because the marketing team was sort of taking the winners that they are already found and sort of replenishing those or recreating the same winners and same messaging angles again and again, it didn't seem like the CAC would ever come down. And they didn't seem to have a data driven or even any scientific method to figure out if messaging angle A is not working, what is B, what is C, and that led us to sort of start thinking about this.
Interesting. The creative fatigue is a very real thing, right? So maybe you can tell us a bit about the product. Or can you describe your first prototype or your first version or MVP? What was that aha moment that essentially led your early clients to essentially say, "Yeah, this is going to help me and help shift to your model essentially."
Yeah, so this is actually quite interesting because we started working with one of a larger growth team that spends, double-digit millions on Meta, and their process was such that they would launch a campaign of maybe 50 creatives in a week or so, and then at the end of the week, the entire creative team would sort of come together for a sync up, and everybody would have watched all the creatives and everybody would have made their notes on, I think this creative worked because it had a good hook, or
Yeah.
somebody else would say, I think we related with Gen Z really well, that's why people are watching this video a lot more.
Yeah.
So there were all these subjective hypotheses that everybody had, and yet there was no objective way for anybody in the team to put their head down and say,
Yeah.
I have watched all 10,000 ads and I know this for sure.
Yeah.
So what they told us is that if you can get your system, your AI to watch
Yeah.
all the ads, make all notes, and objectively tell us out
Yeah.
of the thousands of ads we ever launched, these are very clear patterns.
Amazing.
So yeah, the first prototype was just a Google Doc that we sent to this company,
Okay.
and so that's how we got our first customer, and then that Google Doc eventually became a product few months later.
Amazing, amazing. I love that starting story always. Yeah, I guess pattern recognition is the main thing, right? And you're dealing with creatives, so these folks don't really care about data that much. A lot of things fall into gut instinct and stuff like that. So let's talk about let's maybe give the audience a little bit of a look under the hood. How does GetCrux essentially do this pattern recognition, right? I believe you score like over 100 attributes, without using tagging, army of taggers. Can you walk us through how you achieve this?
Yeah, so I think tagging happens in two ways, right? One
Hmm.
is sometimes you need our AI system to sort of objectively come back and tell you, look, these are the three patterns that we found. Or sometimes a team will come up with a hypothesis saying that, maybe I think creatives with a blue background work better than red. So
Yeah.
we sort of allowed the flexibility of somebody being able to define how they want a creative to be tagged. So somebody can come in and say, go and watch all the videos and figure out whether the location in which the video is shot is indoor or outdoor. So what our system will do is it will go watch all the videos, make notes for every frame in the video. It's almost like somebody pausing a video at every second and then writing some notes down.
Hmm.
So, then a tag is assigned on the creative, is indoor or outdoor. And then
Okay.
you can sort of monitor from these creatives that are indoor, how many winning ads have actually come from this segment, which helps you decide which way you need to go.
Amazing. Amazing. And just as a quick insight for the audience as well, can you perhaps describe some of the usual suspects in terms of creative variables that essentially help you predict a good creative and who are directly responsible for the CAC dropping?
Yeah, so I think a lot of teams that I have seen, they obsess a lot over ROAS or CAC, which
Hmm.
are easy to measure metrics, but they
Yeah.
might not necessarily be good predictors of whether a creative is going to be successful. So
Right.
what my team and I have been sort of advising people to do is to look at cost per incremental reach, which sort of tells you how many net new prospects or accounts has the ad touched, which we had not done earlier. So that is the new reach that a creative is getting.
Amazing.
So that is, we found that to be a very good predictor of a success.
Amazing, amazing. That's a great insight. And let's perhaps also talk now like about the actual creative process itself or the Gen AI studio. Once the platform kind of spots this winning pattern, can you walk us through the workflow like for the creatives out there? Like how do you get from that insight to essentially the new ready to launch creative? And what kind of guardrails do you put, to keep that output to be on brand? And also how are your clients kind of balancing this whole UGC, authentic UGC versus AI feel to it?
Yeah, 100%. So I think you start with an insight of the pattern recognition that we just found, right? So maybe you say,
Hmm.
okay, I need a creative that is shot indoor, uses X kind of talent, and
Mm.
has X kind of messaging. So once you have those
Yeah.
variables sorted, what we also try and do is we sort of fine tune our system on the brand guidelines of any
Okay.
brand that we work with, right? So very minute stuff like, what the typography needs to be, what the color palette needs to be, so
Hmm.
that, any creative that comes out of the system has to be 100% on brand and legally compliant. And what we've also seen is in terms of, if you look at where AI is right now,
Hmm.
sometimes there might be a temptation to use AI generated videos,
Yeah.
and we've seen a lot of brands try to use like talking heads like us and make
Yeah.
UGC ads out of that. But
Yeah.
we've seen a contrary insight, which is static ads have actually done much better,
Oh,
generated static ads, than videos,
amazing.
because videos are still very high touch, very high effort,
Hmm.
and they need to be a lot more authentic. So, anytime somebody sees an AI ad on their feed, there is an
Right.
instant turn off.
Right.
Whereas it is much simpler to replicate an AI generated static ad. So, yeah,
Amazing.
in terms of balance, we've seen more people aligning towards the static ad side of things.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, I think static ads are definitely underrated and it's all about getting the right message, right? Every day I come across a lot of ads that are very much in your face and like very intuitive, like when you talk about the conveying the solution to the person. And I guess, yeah, it's all up to the creative strategy. That's interesting that you say that the static ads are working good, but I guess
Yeah,
it's all also up to how these AI models progress over time. And I'm sure the video side of things would catch up as well.
Yeah, for sure. And the way that we are approaching static ads is not just for scaling, but a lot of brands are approaching this very interestingly. So what they try to do
Mhm.
is when they have a concept for a new video,
Yeah.
instead of going ahead and spending 100,000 on producing that video, they would
Okay.
quickly launch static ads that sort of replicate
Ah,
that concept.
wow,
So
that's
like a
amazing.
testing mechanism. And if the static ad works, it makes sense to put money behind that video.
Hmm.
But if the core concept is not resonating, you saved 100,000 in a wrong investment.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. Test the messaging first and test the idea first, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Could you perhaps share with the audience like a case study, like a before and after story, right? Like a success story of what the person was doing or the brand was doing before, like the volume of ads they produced and, the diversity of concepts, number of creative variations. Can you share some numbers in terms of how the before and after look like?
Yeah, 100%. So we're working with this consumer app in the US that is an extremely lean team of maybe, just 50 people, and their revenue is in the high double digits. So they are a team that needs a lot of external support, and they've structured in a way where they're not doing a lot of things in-house, right? So
Mm-hmm.
naturally, when they wanted to scale their volume of creatives and their ad spend, they look to their agency to sort of come up with, almost doubling the creative volume there. But, as a lot of agencies still are relying on, in-house talent to produce those videos, there's always a bottleneck in terms of how much throughput you can come up with, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the problem statement when we came in was help us scale 2 times on Meta over the next 3 months when they were
Mm-hmm.
already spending more than a million on a month on Meta.
Okay.
And to hit that kind of scale, the problem statement was, you need to test at least 200 to 300 static ads a
Mm-hmm.
month. And it's not an easy feat to do those manually, or even
Oh
if
yeah.
you're prompting textually, even that is like a difficult thing to do. So what we ended up doing is we figured out these tiny workflows.
Yeah.
One workflow, for example, is just scan all the comments on our social media, figure out the top objections that people have, and convert
Mm-hmm.
those into 5 ads. So every week, 5 ads would come from comments. Another workflow is look at competitor ads, find what we are missing out on, and just
Yeah.
take inspiration from there. So 5 more ads would come from there. So we
Right.
had all these workflows set up, and every week when the CMO started their review on a Monday morning, they had 50 ads ready for review. So all they need to do is, click yes or click no. And not only were we able to hit that 2x scale in 3 months, but we also did that at a 10% lower CAC because we went to new audiences and new messaging angles that were untapped.
Interesting. Interesting. I think that's an interesting case study. Yeah. So, with regards to actual measurement of all these creatives, right? Because that's where the actual value is when you can connect the dots between how a creative essentially influenced, a customer behavior, right? That's what marketing is all about. And what's your measurement process like? How do you tie this, the creative to, let's say, incremental returns, essentially?
Yeah, so what a lot of teams, I mean, the first question that CFOs would ask when such a deal is being considered is,
Yeah.
how are we going to measure the impact of this, right?
Yeah.
Because over the last 12 months, there have been so many AI tools that the marketing team is trying. But the question is again, we've bought all these AI tools.
Mm-hmm.
Has that really reflected in, better performance, lower CPA, or have we have improved any one of the channels in terms of scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is always a question that CFOs ask us or the CMO when they're considering something like GetCrux.
Interesting.
What we've tried to do there is instead of relying on the ad platforms or the measurement from the ad platforms, we connect to the backend data sources and the internal source of truth that a
Mm-hmm.
company would have. So if they have a multi-touch attribution, or if they're running incrementality tests in-house, we
Yeah.
would treat that as source of truth, and then we would go back and connect that.
Amazing. Yeah, amazing. That's starting to become like the norm now, right? Like a gold standard of measurement. And I think tying it back to creative is super powerful. Yeah, and so maybe we can talk a little bit about this change that is happening in the industry and in these teams as well, right? How are you marrying essentially, art and science, right? And or art and data, or however you want to call it. I think you're helping build this new role, which is essentially called creative analysts or performance creative role, people who
Right.
essentially analyze the intel and essentially are able to take creative or write creative direction after that. What's the playbook for getting these teams kind of evolve these teams essentially and get these creative strategy kind of people or designers excited about data?
Yeah, of course. I think a lot of teams that are forward thinking in these terms, what they've tried to do is
Yeah.
almost establish like a performance creative or growth creative kind of subsection or sub department within the brand and creative team. So
Okay.
that team is actually a part of the creative team, but they work very closely with the growth team. So these are people who have to be extremely data oriented. At the same time, they need to have the mind of a classic advertiser, right? Where we try and come in is not to push a lot of data or insights down the throat of a brand manager or a creative person, but rather we're trying to help growth teams express their insights much better. So earlier, what would happen is growth team would send a bunch of data on an Excel sheet or a report to their brand counterpart, and the
Yeah.
brand counterpart would not know what to do with it. But now with our insights and data, what they now do is they send an actual creative,
Yeah.
and there is a narrative or an insight or learning attached to it. So
Amazing.
it's become much easier for the brand team to become data oriented, which was like the
Yeah.
bottleneck earlier.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah. Otherwise, you just know which creative worked, but you don't know what exactly is driving that change, right? And
Yeah.
I think that little nuance and data points or narrative, like you mentioned, is going to be super helpful for the teams of the future. That's amazing to hear. Yeah. Talking about that and how people are going to evolve in terms of teams, let's take a walk into the future a little bit, right? Let's what I would like to get your take on how these autonomous agents or AI strategies are kind of essentially transforming marketing teams in general, right? Like Meta is saying things like, "Give me your money and trust me, bro," right? What's your take on where's this heading, like in terms of the market?
I think the lines are definitely blurring. Though I
Mhm.
would say that that vision of give us your credit card and we'll get you revenue, that what Meta sees is a little
Yeah,
bit far fetched, because large enterprises or even sophisticated teams are not going to
yeah,
rely on the ad platform no matter how convenient it becomes. So
hundred
maybe
percent.
for the an entry level startup or a fast growing startup, that works very well. But for teams with a sophisticated setup, you still need the tools to empower the team. So
Yeah,
it's not like you're going to be building agents that will completely automate their setup.
yeah,
But what it has definitely done is, now you and I have the same tools. So the quality of the content itself, with like VO3 and all these other AI tools out there, you and I can almost, if we can get to the same level of content as somebody with a production setup can get to.
yes,
So now the art part of advertising is even more valuable than it was earlier.
yeah.
So I definitely see a future where advertising as a profession, as an art, is still going to be extremely relevant. Just that everybody is going to have the tools to get to a certain level.
100%. 100%. I think that those lines blurring is very, very well said. Things like how non-technical people can now code something up with vibe coding and vice versa, right? Coders or technical people can now do more creative stuff, right? Produce content and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be an amazing time. Although, I'm just curious to where it'll finally end up. Amazing. So, perhaps you can share a little bit of advice, right? Some of these teams are just getting started. There's so much noise in the market, ever changing things. Every day there's some new story about AI. What would be like a starting point advice you'd give to a creative team who's just starting to explore this? What should they focus on first and then second and third?
I think there is always a temptation to go out and explore what is out there in the market in terms of
Hmm.
VO3 or any other AI tools out there who can sort of turn your product images or your asset library into ads. The teams that are seeing more success for this are sort of going back to the basics, and the discussions that they are having every day and every week are not about what AI tools we should be using, and how do I take VO3 and fit myself into VO3. It's rather, let's start from a place of, do I understand my audience? Do I understand their pain points? Do I understand why I should exist in their lives? Why I deserve my audience's attention. So if you start from that place and then you try to fill in the gaps with AI, that is a much more sensible approach, and I've seen much more success with it. On the other hand, I've also seen a lot of brands just spraying a lot of AI ads and not getting anywhere, and then 6 months later coming back to question it. So the
Yeah.
basics, I don't think the basics will ever change.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I was also interviewing agency owner yesterday, and he was saying the same exact thing, right? People wondering whether agencies will go away, right? When brands can take over so much of the creative workload. But in essence, it's the same problem. You don't understand the audience well enough. You don't understand what your solution, what problem your product solves. You got to be able to convey that message in a very creative way, right? Amazing.
Exactly.
Awesome. Yeah. So thanks for that great insight. Let's move on to our lightning round. So short one sentence answers. What's a KPI you check before coffee?
Cost per incremental reach.
Awesome. Awesome. What's the most overrated marketing metric?
It would have to be CPA, CAC, or ROAS. One of
Okay.
those.
Awesome. And what's the AI tool you've been playing around and geeking out with this last quarter?
Yeah,
What's
I
your
know I
favorite tool?
mentioned this multiple times, but VO3 is still the one that I enjoy, and like, yeah, I've burned a ton of money on that until
Yeah,
today.
likewise. Same here, same here. I've been enjoying creating all the weird viral video concepts. Yeah, it's something that the human eye has never seen before, and you can create it, from scratch. It's just amazing. What's a marketing myth that you like to basically kill forever?
I mean, I'm torn between two, but I'll go with this one, which is the right way to do advertising on paid social or paid media is to dump a bunch of creatives into the ad account and hoping Meta will find it because of
Yeah,
Advantage Plus and everything. But
yeah.
that's not how it works.
Right. That's brilliant. And so one final piece of advice for brands who want a quick win, who's still guessing at their creative strategy, what would you say to them?
Yeah, like I think this goes to say what I mentioned earlier, which is
Okay.
go back to the basis, go back to studying your audience, read through all the comments manually, read through all the reviews, pick up
Yeah.
the phone and call your users. Even for B2C companies, I've seen great CMOs do that.
Yeah.
Just talk to 10 users every day.
That's amazing advice. Amazing advice. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Atharva. That's a wrap for this edition of the Full Funnel Podcast. Thank you so much for essentially helping some of these creatives move from doing guesswork to essentially using some data in their workflow. And to everyone listening, if today's chat sparked any idea, please hit follow and subscribe so you don't miss another episode. And share this with a teammate who might find this useful. Also, please follow Atharva on socials. We'll link his socials in the description below. We'll be back with another guest next week who's pushing the boundaries of AI driven growth. Until then, keep testing, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next full funnel. Thanks, Atharva. Nice to have you on.
All right. Thanks, Rohit. Amazing. Thanks for having me.